Good morning, everyone. Tom Kaczynski here from Free Atlantic Radio. Hopefully, hi, everybody. It's been a while. I've been busy doing some work and some business. Let me just get this camera adjusted right. I usually prefer to do things outside, but it's raining quite a bit today, and I want to try to be a little quiet so I don't wake up the wife, but we'll see. She has ears that are supersonic almost in their ability to hear things. But I want to thank you for listening in and thank everyone who's been listening to the podcast. I appreciate you guys been sending some really nice comments lately. So that has been most welcome and supported. And I just figured I'd come on a little bit and share some things I was thinking about. So last night I went to bed insanely early. I went to bed about 6 p.m. I just had been having guests up here for a while, which is very nice, but exhausting because I am an introvert and a hermit by nature. I think I'll own those things. That's not a big deal. And so I wake up sometime around midnight, don't know precisely which, but the wife, who doesn't sleep quite the same schedule I do, was watching what was happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And for those of you who haven't been paying attention, they were burning a whole bunch of cars down. By they, I mean some Black Lives Matter group. And as usual, there was some incident of police violence, but it was responded to by an effort to burn one's own city down. And they went and they marched on the courthouse. And when my wife had told me last night, although I did not watch it myself, it was burning. I really didn't have an interest in watching that. I mean, the spirit of discord that's around this country is insane, and I recognize the demonic forces at work that are behind it. These are the sort of things I don't really say online when I'm on my podcast because people don't see the world through those lights, but I very clearly do, and I know we are at a time where all the cities of America will eventually burn, or at least a great many of them, I believe. And the reason I think that is because there is no will to stop it. The right has decided that that's not our problem. The left has decided that that tantrum will be thrown onto end, and the rich have decided they like the idea of working for a reset. Some of you who watched my last or listened to my program, or actually you wouldn't have because I just posted it live right now, but when you listen to my program about what's happening with Australia, what you would find is that the sort of totalitarian approach that we are worried about, the authoritarianism, is already here. They've suspended their civil liberties down there. They've suspended the idea that you would have warrantless searches are now permitted. They basically have checkpoints where they will quarantine you if you don't submit to blood draws, and their prime minister already telegraphed that they're going to work towards a mandatory vaccination. Now, he backtracked on that, which is his way of saying we want a whole bunch of people to do it voluntarily and then yell at other people, so that there's a huge, massive outcry for that. And what this is really about is it's about digital currency. It's about a global economic reset. It's about the fact that a whole bunch of countries want to be on a single digital currency, that we are going to have one world order, new world order, and that we're working down those lines. So in America, you can't just do that because Americans would resist that. At least country folk would. In some places, there would be people who would stand against that. But because that would be the case, we have to go ahead and have people submit to the idea of mass inspections, which is what COVID's about, but also the idea of mass curfews and governmental control of things, which is, I think, why Black Lives Matter is being allowed to proliferate so much, because it creates a situation where people will cheer for the government to suppress the people who are out there, and they are serving as the useful idiots in this equation. And I am, Jewel, thank you. I am excuse me, I am doing very well, actually. Things are going pretty good for me. I mean, what would I say? I am waltzing into tribulation. That's how I actually think of the thing. I see these things in a much bigger, broader framework, and I'm working on the Old Testament beard to fit for the sort of things I'm going to have to talk about. Maybe I'm playing the role of the holy fool in this whole game. Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate that. And with winter coming, the beard will grow in. So hopefully it looks okay. I get a little gray here, and it kind of does one of these things, but we'll see what happens. The wife has been keeping it clean for me, and she does a great job. And Dana, if she was awake, would say hello to everybody. We actually miss doing the shows, believe it or not. It's one of our favorite things was being able to do the nighttime shows, and I will say for the next month, we'll see what I can do. I am coming on Friday. I will tell you that. So the Friday evening show will be back, and I know you guys will be excited about that. And eventually, you will have much more content. There are big things happening here that will change my personal situation to allow me to do more programming and content, God willing, and more aggressive content, too, about topics I haven't been able to touch before because of things that have been arranged around here. So we'll leave that as a nice little mystery for you. But I assure you, by the time we hit election time, I'll be able to talk a lot more about what's been going on. And I guess I could talk a little bit about what was going on over here, right? I was meeting with some people. Our good friend Knaz Filan visited, as well as John Q, and all the Free Atlantic people. And we talked to one another, and we realized, if we're honest about it, There's not too much we can do right now, but what we do realize is when this thing begins falling apart because of the economic malfeasance of the bank system, because of terrible bureaucratic leadership, none of us have any desire to fight for a country that is built in this sort of financial debt obligation that the United States has become. And it's an interesting story, and one I may eventually tell. If I write a history of the Atlantic one day, what I would say to you is a good country that started 400 years ago in terms of the Mayflower Compact was subverted in subtle ways by the Constitution. When have you ever heard anyone tell you that? But the idea that you'd have separation of church and state, while a good idea designed to protect both individual citizens and the church, has become the means by which the church is undone, or whether the church has been undone, morality has been destroyed, and it's actually a really interesting backdrop if you begin to understand, because when the Constitution was signed, for example, Massachusetts actually had a state religion of Puritanism, and what ended up happening was that as that got changed, those instincts didn't go away. They morphed into the modern day progressivism, which came through transcendentalism and worked into the Civil War. And the idea was that we could create a utopia on Earth. And so we did the same mistake that all sort of pagan heresies, all these things do, which is they worship the creation rather than the creator. And when you begin to understand that, that really puts in scope what the problem is. The problem with America is not our wealth or not our talents. It's this idea we have that we are here and we are fighting amongst one another to build this perfect empire, this perfect world, this perfect country, this perfect union. And yet the perfection never comes from without to within. We keep thinking we can make a better person, we can make a better omelet if we just have more eggs that we throw into it. And whether it's schools or banks or ideologies, we end up to the same ground. But once upon a time, long, long ago, we were a nation that was founded in faith, where people came here recognizing the purpose of the state was to protect the awareness of the individual, to seek in faith the goodness and grace that was required to have a better future. And some of us are rediscovering that fact, sitting here in the woods as we watch that godliness, ungodliness, I should say, leads to the sort of wickedness we see in the streets. And while I was watching the demoniacal tendencies of the people who were out burning, Seattle, Portland, Kenosha, you pick it every time it's different cities, they're motivated by this desire to go ahead and create a utopia in this world. And whether it's your utopia is their dystopia, ultimately we end up in the same mistakes because we end up chasing something that is separate from it. And so Dana was watching last night. She was watching this program. Good morning, Red. Glad to see you. Dana was watching these things, and I went downstairs and I was reading the prophet Jeremiah because I like to read the Bible. And you should read the Bible too. You can learn a lot from it. I mean, it's a good book of history and events that are out there, even if you're not capable at this point yet of perceiving the deeper spiritual wisdom. That's okay. It comes. It takes a while. It took me decades, and I'm a smart guy. And it's harder the smarter you are. But I was reading this, and I read this quote for Jeremiah, just so you know the background of it, is about the fall of Judah before the Babylonian captivity. And it's about a prophet who's kind of surly, and he ends up getting thrown in jail ultimately because he keeps pissing people off with his prophecies that Babylon will be overrunning Judea because Judea has abandoned their beliefs. Something that might be relevant for this time in a good book if you want to read one. But there's this great line in it. There's this. It's Jeremiah 34:17, and I'm going to read it to you because it perfectly explains our problem. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, ye have not hearkened unto me, in proclaiming liberty, every one to his brother, and every man to his neighbor. Behold, I proclaim a liberty for you, saith the Lord, to the sword, to the pestilence, and to the famine. I will make you to be removed from all the kingdoms of the earth. And I will give the men who have transgressed my covenant, which have not performed the words of the covenant which they made before me, when they cut the calf in twain and passed the parts thereof. So what is that about? It's about the idea that liberty improperly used will go ahead and lead to licentiousness, to anarchy, to disorder, to the discord we see in America today, the modern day Babylon. And for those who are into biblical words, by the way, I'll just share with you, I believe that the great Babylon referenced in Revelation is in fact the United States, and specifically it's probably New York City. And I don't say that because there's a lot of bad people there. There's a lot of good people there, unfortunately, who live in a very bad area in terms of how things are run. And that's sad, but that's the cosmopolitanism. And as you look at the statue of the goddess in the harbor, right, whether you call it Semiramis, Ishtar, Liberty, it's all the same name. It's the female goddess. that was the ultimate heresy. That slight that's out there is always going to be a provocation. And I know people don't understand that. They don't understand why the Masons sent something there. To them, it's just a happy symbol because we don't know how to see things. We have things right in front of us with plain sight that we can't apprehend, and we have things that are hidden in their knowledge and their intent that we accept in ways that we perhaps should not. And understanding that and being mindful of that, you begin to understand why things happen much differently. So you understand why we're about to get pounded with two hurricanes and why we're getting wildfires and all that. And people say, oh, well, God doesn't love us. In fact, if you really understand tribulation correctly, and I know this will shock people, God does terrible things to people to remind them that they are not an entity unto themselves, to remind them of the need of God, and for the fact that you are here to develop a relationship with God is the primary purpose of your being. Why do I say that? Life is short, eternity is long, and your job is to go ahead and cultivate a spirit in yourself so you can escape this trap. Do people do that? Of course they don't. Why? Because they think this is all there is, and they have been tricked and blinded by their own eyes. And the book tells you, and a lot of other things will tell you too, if you start to understand science well enough and you understand quantum physics, or if you understand some of the deeper implications of existential philosophy, all roads lead to the same outcome, which is that there is a God. He is good, he is great, and in fact, Jesus is his son. But in any case, my job is not to proselytize to you tonight, other than to share this story of biblical wisdom that I wanted to say to you, that liberty taken to an end unto itself always ends up in anarchy. And that's where we've ended up in the United States. And think about for a second how our ideology of tolerance is all that you can do whatever you want, but I can't tell you what to do. So as we literally watch our cities burn and see the economic engines that drive this country go down, thinking it's not going to impact us, obviously that's farcical. And the controlled deconstruction of the United States is the story of the year 2020. That the elites have decided to destroy this, and I would imagine it's because their world order does not include America. It includes a broken up America that's divided into different bits and pieces. Hopefully New Albion will be one of them. But that ultimately this is permitted because we are blind to our own actions, and that we are not humble, we are not repentant, we are not good. You know, one of the hardest things you learn as you really start to study is that goodly and godly are two different things. Godly is about service, goodly is about your own vanity. And while I'm not trying to argue anyone should be a bad person, you know, the one thing that some people have been right about is the idea of good and evil is a little bit dependent upon your perspective in terms of the actions, if not the desired outcomes. And the idea that we're ever going to end up anywhere better by chasing that is absurd, because it never has worked that way. What happens is that people seeking the highest good always do the greatest evil because they think it justifies the cost. And yet, if we were to follow laws that were greater than ourselves, we might do better. But that's not going to happen, and I understand that's not going to happen, and I understand we are on a fast track. Let me read something interesting to you, though. I mean, you know, like you look at numbers and interesting things. Like I'll read just one verse to you real fast. So just because I think this is funny, and this is from the book of Revelation, right? Revelation 9:11, right? 9:11. You know how everything always happens on 9:11? So here's what it actually says, because you know that things are hidden in plain sight. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. What does that mean? Literally, 9/11 is the statement in the Bible in Revelation that names the Antichrist. So why would you have a mass explosion in New York City some 19 years ago today? Or I shouldn't say today, on September 11th, my apologies. Because that is the day of celebrating. That's probably a sacrificial offering, to be honest with you. And if you begin to understand these things and all these little pieces that are out there, you can see that. Or some of you may have seen that UN video that was really interesting about how they're celebrating the rise of a new world order. And it's interesting, as much as Australia and China are provoking against one another, you see that ultimately they're adopting the same sort of principles. So even when we end up in war, we end up in this terrible dialectic, right? Where we see that we are going forward, where there's this wicked and heinous new world order, and it's probably going to lead us into wars and all sorts of outcomes. And I suspect something will break it and be presented as the happy alternative to replace it, and most people will be grateful because they don't understand the means by which people are manipulated. And I've spent a lot of time reading and learning and trying to understand that and putting some depth behind that, because people always want to know the practical outcomes, right? They want to know, how do I survive this? How do I get past this? But no one really wants to know why you keep ending up in the same situations, and that's the thankless part of it. I could tell you how to survive everything, and you would think I was a hero, but if I tell you why you keep ending up in the lurch, you'll get pissed off, because then I'm telling you what to do. And it's not so much that I'm telling you my rules. It has nothing to do with what Tom Kaczynski wants, believe you me. These are simply the rules as such as they are, and if you are willing to be honest with yourself and to shed your idea that you have so much control in this life, you can begin to see the world a little bit differently. And that's what I've been able to do. So hopefully that has been useful. But I will say, I do think in the coming days, what we will see is that by January 1st, I think we're going to see a currency reset be forced on the United States, and maybe faster than that. But I think I have it on good sourcing that within the next 2 weeks, we're going to see a lot of really funny things happen economically and see the dollars begin to hyperinflate. And these are good international sources, let's put it that way. And we'll see if it's right. I mean, in the end, it will be right, even if the timing is a little bit off, because of the fact that the debt-to-income ratio is upside down, that so many businesses have been destroyed. I mean, I read a story, I didn't read it on air, but it was talking about how 1 in 4 hotels now can't pay their mortgage. When you start having commercial debt collapse, what will happen is that most of the finance sector will finally be able to get hit, and what they will do is they will bail themselves out. So in the same way that we can't figure out how to get any money to people on unemployment, where we went ahead and cut down their money to about 10% in many places of what they were making, and that they can't get stimulus to people who desperately need it, even though I do understand it does cause debt problems. But remember, this is self-inflicted wounds in a lot of ways. We are going to watch that a major reset that encompasses anything is in the offing. And one of the reasons why things I think are not happening is because the worse things get, the more people will agree to. You know, people have very low resistance to problems that exist, right? And so what will happen is you will see situations engineered where the civil unrest will get worse, the violence in the cities will get worse, the economic situation will get more dire, the availability of food will become more reduced, and that you will see eventually a desire to do much more aggressive solutions by the government, because that's what the government wants. They want big problems because big problems allow big solutions, and the solutions aren't necessarily helpful. The Patriot Act sure as hell didn't make us safer, but what it does do is it creates the mandate to create a bigger and more invasive government. And we're going to see that coming. I mean, you see all these scans and checkpoints and all these things being put in place to get you habituated to the idea that people can be restricted in such a way. And after a while, no matter how heinous the original intent or how innocuous it is, people are like, well, it's just the way it happens. So the scanner will now check for 2 things instead of 1, or 3 things instead of 2. And what will happen is people with the promise of normalcy will begin to attack those who resist that. It's a pretty simple scheme. It works pretty effectively. And it does mean that if you are someone who is not going to be an adherent to the new future, you probably need to begin planning now for living in a reservation-like reality, because I think that is actually what we will be facing and what we will be facing. And I know Dana and I have begun doing that. And we have already begun to think, you know, especially if things go really weird in election time or something, you know, you may see me in writing more than pictures, because it would not be safe to be able to be on electronics. I'm actually contemplating a future where there will be no electronics involved. And I know that sounds severe to people, but I think that those are the sort of things we may very well be facing, because you see that a lot of what's being done is being hooked up deliberately to AI. And I really haven't done a great enough episode on transhumanism. I have to do my own research to do it right for you guys. And right now, there's too many other things on my mind, but you should be aware of it. You should go read someone like Kurzweil, or go read the Homo Deus book, and be aware that there are people whose end game is basically to link man to the machine. And as we see weird things come forward, you know, like transhumanism is a good example of this. You will see the effort to transform what it means to be a sovereign, sentient being, because what they want to do is introduce things back from the old days. You're going to see genetic engineering bring back DNA that was forgotten. Think Jurassic Park, but with hybridized people, right? Something like that could be coming down the line. And I know this is more than people are ready to contemplate. People just want to know how they survive the next day. And it's hard for me to tell that story, to be honest with you, because I know things, and I've learned things, and maybe I've dug too deep and gone to the bottom of the rabbit hole where I feel kind of comfortable tumbling, but when I talk about it, people don't understand. But I don't know. But anyway, some of you have stuck through with me through my various ramblings. So if you want to throw up any questions, I'll stick for the half hour, and then I'm going to go make myself some breakfast. In fact, I'm going to, while we're doing this, throw on the oven while I'm here in the kitchen to go ahead and make something. Let's see if I have a bagel left. Lord be praised. There's one blueberry bagel left for me, so that will be my breakfast this morning while the wife sleeps. And just get this out here. And you guys will have the virtue of hearing me wander through my kitchen as it is. But I am looking forward to having for you some new shows and some new content, and I do want to stay involved. I mean, you guys find use in what I talk about, right? I mean, it's worth me taking a little bit of a risk to help people who need help. And, we've reached this point where it's kind of hard to tell people what to do because the battles we're facing are not as simple as politics anymore. They're just not. They're about how you look at the world and your relationship in it. And if the problems, if the problems seem too big to understand, then what you almost have to begin asking yourself is how you can deal with them on a level. Because ultimately, this is all about you. You, me, and each and every one of us, and choices we're going to make. Everything you're seeing scripted in these days is about deciding where you're going to stand. Because this is the end times, man. This is the final battle. Are you ready for it? Do you know what it's about? Just filling up the water here to put some tea on. Now, my apologies. So I was saying that in the beginning of Revelation, much like in the beginning of Genesis, what you read is that God, good morning, living soul, is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And if you know your gospel well enough, you know that in Matthew 24, Jesus says that the end times will be like the time of Noah. And if you really want to get bonus points and do some extra credit reading, go find the book of 2nd Esdras, which is one that used to be in the Bible, but kind of got pushed aside for reasons. We don't know what those are, but it was in the Apocrypha of the King James Version, and it actually covered some of Daniel's visions. And you'll hear about an eagle that was an island that got its claws eventually taken out. Might be familiar to some of you, who knows? A couple people thought it was the Romans. This person thinks it's America. But ultimately, what it's about is it's about a choice that was made long ago by your great sire, which was, do you want to serve God or do you want to serve yourself? And if you serve good or evil, what you find is you're serving yourself. And why do I say that? Because you're seeking to understand something you can't understand. And it's not that people don't intend well. They intend very well. But the problem you run into is a little different. It's that you cannot apprehend the ends required to make the right judgments, and that's why a lot of times the very best of us, the most idealistic of us, get into the biggest trouble, because what happens is we chase the idea that we can create a heaven on earth, and it's the trick from which we are most easily led. People think that we are led astray by our vices, and it's not really that. It's usually the best people are led astray by their virtues, although interestingly, people seeking secret knowledge often end up in the same place. Whether you're a Kabbalist who worships Marina Abramovic as a way to get close to Satan, or Lucifer, seeing those as two sides of the evil being, right? Or if you are someone who is just a certain sort of zealot who ultimately tries to impose your will on things, ultimately you still have the fundamental problem, which is that do you have faith in yourself or do you have faith in God? And why do I say this? Because ultimately, you either have the choice to say you are the one who can make decisions about this world, and you have to make decisions for yourself. You have no choice but that. That's the choice that's forced on each of us as our birthright, that we have to make judgments about good and evil every single day, that we have to accept how we're going to deal with things, and we could either be thankful for a world that provides and sustains for us and trust for it to work out that way, or conversely, we could be angry and upset, and we could fight over and try to impose our sort of wills. And this is the sort of stuff Jesus was teaching about, and I know people don't get it. And I know they don't get it because I have a hard time getting it. Look, I'm a man. I have a lot of enemies. I don't like most of them. And some of them I really hate, and even my friends grate on me after a while, and I know these things, and yet I try to have a different mindset because I recognize the nature of who and what I am is what makes this world a difficult place. And if there were 1,000 people like me, Lord knows this place would be a fiery inferno. And that's not necessarily good, but I'm honest about that because I recognize what sin is. Sin is the wages of death, writes the Apostle Paul in Romans, but what does that really mean? Death comes from the fact that we try to make choices about things that are good and evil instead of making choices to sustain life. And life itself is an interesting thing. Life is nothing more of a harmonization with our Creator, who made us out of moldy clay, that we literally need to reconnect to that. And I know people don't get that either. But the reason why I mention all this is You're going to go through the greatest challenge of history, probably, if my guess is right, in the next year or so. And when you start facing some of these decisions, you're going to have to figure out, what do you actually believe? What do you actually support? And what are you willing to fight for and against? And the thing that will be interesting is everyone's waiting for a big conflict, thinking that's what's going to decide the thing. And maybe it will, and I do think big conflicts will happen, but it won't be that decides what happens to you. What it will be is lots of individual little choices that you make, not even realizing you're making them, passively accepting things, because the way this thing always works is by distraction. That you end up focused on the really big things. Am I going to be broke? Am I going to lose my job? Are we going to be in a war? Or these things? And obviously we have to survive them. It doesn't do you a lot of good to starve or be shot. I get that, and we talk about that. But on the same note, you have to think of what you are giving up to survive. It's the same reason why most politicians end up as scumbags, to be honest with you. What ends up happening is they make certain agreements that are required by the nature of our financial bought system, right? And they go ahead and sacrifice things they genuinely believe in support of other things, because they think this is the price I have to pay. But anytime you give up something you think is right in terms of something you know is wrong, that devil's bargain always comes home to roost. You know, if you don't understand that, go read Goethe. You can read Faust, or go read Marlowe, or any of those ones. Actually had a lovely conversation about that. But it is the choice of how you're going to be and how you're going to conduct yourself is the key to it. And it's much deeper than any political system or any ideology or who you're voting for, because I'll tell you something, every politician's lying to you and every ideology is incorrect. Some are worse than others, some will get you killed faster, some will get you killed slower, but ultimately they're all ending up in the same place because they're all based on the lie, and the lie they're based on is the human intellect can somehow apprehend a perfect system. We can't do it. That's why we were put in a garden, and ultimately we built the walls of the tower around us. You want to know what the religion of the one world order is? It's very simple. It's the tower that builds upon, that the people at the top use to try to get to the top. It has the blood of all the bodies that build it. And of course, trying to reach to heaven, to an idea that's even beyond this realm is an absurdity. Yet we do it over and over again. And when you see that good old eye of the serpent on top of it, you'll know that that's what happens again and again and again and again. And this is history. This is all human history is. And the really smart people know it, because you start watching and you see that there's all these people out there who are really aware, who give you your best information, by the way. Pick someone like a Doug Hagman, a Dave Hodges, whoever you like, a Steve Quayle. All these people who know where the bones are buried and tell you these things. And they will tell you stories that you are not prepared to believe. And why don't you know that? Well, your history was stolen from you. You could go look how the Smithsonian hid the bones, for instance, of the ancient Nephilim, the serpent mounds. You can go see them in Ohio. These things exist. They're all over the place. Good morning, Skeptical. Good to see you again. So, if you begin looking at our own history, you begin to understand our history is a lie that was really a Masonic construction. You really want to read something interesting? You want to go down a rabbit hole? Go read The Secret Destiny of America by Manly P. Hall. He will tell you how this land was known well long ago, and it was imagined as the new Atlantis of Bacon's imagination, that we would go ahead and they would create a civilization that was global in scope, that was designed to be transcendental to the religions, and that was designed to go ahead and represent this idea that somehow humanity could, through its own internal light, the dream of the old Greek philosophers or the Egyptian mystery schools, going all the way back to Akhenaten, that there would be this idea that somehow man would exist out of the realm of God, and that we would live under the light of our own truth, and that this would help us survive. And look, in a lot of ways, it had a lot of things to commend it, right? Because it did have a respect for reason, which I very much support. It had an idea of nature, but it was a group lacking in grace. And ultimately, of all these values, grace is the one you need to be most concerned about. And why do I say that? Because ultimately, the favor of God is what's necessary. The ability of a creator to cause a reset at any point is a given, and that we, in forgetting that, have become enamored with our own rules. And what we have found as we have grown is our rule is just do as thou wilt. That's what Aleister Crowley wrote, and that's our idea of what tolerance means these days, that you can do anything you want as long as it doesn't bother anyone, and we congratulate ourselves on our happiness. But in the same way that we've been able to amass great material wealth and been able to sort of hold this rickety ship together, what's happened is everyone has come to loathe one another. We have no glue to keep us together, and with the smallest of crises, we will inevitably be at each other's throats. Why? Because we don't believe in one another, because we know we are a den of liars. This is true. And because we don't want to work with one another, because we don't have anything in common. So now we have to begin restoring ourselves. And, so I'm out here in the wilderness playing the role of erstwhile prophet, not because I have any secret knowledge, but because I've been able to learn a few things about the world, a lot about the Bible, and look at the way people behave. And as I ask those questions, I end up asking a bigger question, which is what can we do to make things better? And what we have to do is fix ourselves, because all of us are broken. And it's okay to be broken. Every one of us is broken. That's the start of wisdom, the understanding of your own limitations, and to recognize, Jonathan Edwards said it, sinners in the hands of an angry God. It's a great sermon. If you watch that, you'll see how far we've fallen. Let me pour my tea. Okay. So, I will say that I have had some time to think, though not as much as I would have liked. And as such, I have learned a few things, and I do think that the one thing that is encouraging to me is there are a lot of people who are knowledgeable, who understand that something different is in fact necessary, and that we will be able to do some things if people are willing to. And really, it's about awakening people. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing at this point. My big dreams of doing big things, I have ideas, of course I do. I mean, I'd love to have a much better way of putting things. But honestly, this point, we are going to have to survive the fall. And what does that fall mean? Well, if we put it in just a secular sense, here's what's going to happen in the next 18 months. And I think a lot faster than slower. You're going to see the destruction of the existing dollar and replaced by a digital currency. You're going to see increasing violence in the cities that will continue, and you will see wealth leave those cities, and you will see the imposition of much more authoritarian states, and in fact, you may see border controls start to be put in. New York is becoming a failed state. It's a scary situation. I covered it a little bit, but I really didn't do it justice in just how deep the problem has become there because of how much they've lost their tax base. The people who have means are leaving, and the people who don't are left. And what are they going to do as that problem becomes worse? Violence will increase, as it inevitably must in such a situation. And as it does, resources will fail to flow to that area, which also has a big impact for up here in New England, for what it's worth. And as those challenges come forward, I put this in the wrong cup. It will be very difficult for this country to kind of hold together absent a mass global reset. And what I think is America specifically, as the old system, if you want to create a new system, it helps destroy the old. The dollar was the pivot on which the world turned that was quite deliberately set up that way, despite the fact the American people probably wouldn't have wanted it that way. That's what the end of World War II was about, and that's why, what was it? I heard an old timer tell me once, World War II was that America fought a war to keep communism from dying. And it's something that would terrify people to hear, but I think it's actually close to the truth. Because when you begin to understand the philosophies that are out there, and you look at the fact that we were the ones who were insistent on the UN. Woodrow Wilson, League of Nations, Franklin Roosevelt, United Nations, Harry Truman. The Soviets didn't want that stuff, we did. Why? Because we always wanted that global order. That's what America's been pushing for since the beginning. That we can be one world, all like one another, and this runs against, the idea of nations. In the very, I think it was Genesis, I want to say 6, but I could be wrong on that reference. The idea that the Tower of Babel, that's why literally God scattered people into different languages, because we weren't supposed to have one world order. That was never the intention, because then man thinks he is unto God, and that's the problem you end up with over and over again. Anyway. But I'm sharing all this with you, and who knows? Maybe it's insane rambling, me early morning here, just hanging out inside, talking with you guys. But I miss doing it. And I miss sharing my thoughts because someone must find it useful. I mean, I got some subscribers, and it's a very weird thing doing what I do because I talk to cameras, not knowing who's there, and I actually, this will scare. This should be scary, but I almost prefer talking at the camera than talking to people at this point because people ask questions of me that are just not very interesting sometimes. Good morning, Bob. How you doing? And one of the things that I've learned in doing this is that people don't ask the right questions. They look at problems in a very practical light, right? They look at these ideas of things that are right in front of them, and it's more important to see the trend line than the data points, if that makes any sense. So when you begin looking at the flow of history and why things are going certain ways, you begin to understand that there's a need to really connect the dots the right way. And that's what people are not good at. And they're not good at because either they believe too much or they believe too little. And let me explain what I mean by the latter, because the one is easy. I mean, and everyone, it's easy for a gullible person who takes things at face value to be fooled. But another way, you can't be so cynical as to never believe what people say, because what ends up happening is everyone ends up believing that, the things they see are the worst of things, and they lose the sense of creativity that imagination conveys when they think that way, right? So a lot of times, like coronavirus is a perfect example. There was one side that said it was a hoax, and there was one side that said it's real. But the truth of it is it was real to an extent, in the same way that it's designed to go ahead and create outcomes that were totally disconnected. So it could be both this and that. And people need to learn how to do the either or thing, but they don't, for a lot of different reasons, which are sort of complex, and going into all them would not be so useful, I think. But this is where we're kind of at. So what's my point to you? What's the takeaway? The takeaway is that you need to be ready to awaken yourself spiritually, because you are going to deal with battles you have never been prepared to, that will run completely out of the context of what you've thought, beyond the context of ideology, beyond the context of finance, beyond the context of, the things you were told to do to be a good person to survive. Now it's not going to be about good and evil in the sense that you're going to follow the rules or not follow rules, and there'll be simple good guys or simple bad guys. What it will be is a question of what you really believe, and it will be a test. Kanaz says that it's a grail quest, and he's not wrong about that you are seeking to purify yourself. So my question for you, and it's a spiritual one, is what can you awaken in yourself? And this is what you're going to have to figure out, and then find friends and trust you'll be led, because we are coming into a position. I mean, think of what's going to happen if we see, a 1929 type event. Let's just use that as an example. We won't even get all biblical and weird with you. I won't talk about asteroids falling from the heavens, or aliens coming down, pretending fallen angels mockery. You might see those things, but I don't know. Let's just use the ones we can obviously anticipate, instead of the weird stuff that will make it too hard for you. That we'll talk about that, and we'll say that the thing that you will have to understand is that people are going to work for self-interest. So if you want to fight against that, you need something above self-interest to do it. You could look at collective interest. People look at doing that. They look at doing that by region and ethnicity and all sorts of things. Lord knows I've done a lot of that over the years. But ultimately, how much trust you have, when really what's driving you is naked self-interest and the desperate desire to have friends. Can you trust a person who's just using you? And if you feel like you can, then you're a braver person than I am. That's why I have a hard time trusting almost anybody. I do have a few dear friends out there, and a few in here this evening. Some of you who I've had the pleasure to meet now, and I've enjoyed very much. But what I would say is that if you don't change yourself and change who you are before you get to these things, I'm all for foxhole conversions, but the way you go ahead and approach the days ahead is going to be much harder on you. So what can you do with the time you have available? Understand there is no political solution to a spiritual problem. Understand that culture is downwind of faith, and faith is ultimately a manifestation of your spiritual belief of how you want to be in the world. So you can vote for whomever you want. You can vote for Trump, and maybe you think that that's a less bad outcome than having Biden. I can see why people think that way. In the end, the same sort of outcomes happen. It's just a question of the speed at which they occur, because there is no Messiah that's going to be here on this earth, of this earth, let's put it that way. And that we need to recognize that and be okay with that. And that's okay. That's the beginning of it, And then you work with people who you can work with, and you find people who share your beliefs and your ideas, and that's the people you work with. And will they have your background? Yeah. Should you support your heritage? Absolutely. Should you be proud of who you are? Why wouldn't you be? All these sort of things. And all these things are used as wedges against people. But ultimately, you're in a spiritual war now, and it's going to be weird. I mean, and I guess maybe that's why I ended up, it's kind of funny thinking back over my own life, that I actually ended up having my background in medieval studies. And it's not something you would think would be very useful, but in a lot of ways, the Middle Ages were the happiest time of mankind. Why? Because man knew where he stood in the universe, and now we, having had an inflated sense of ourselves, are going to deal with something very, very different. And I think that that's something that is worth looking at. So let me just see if I missed any questions you guys asked me, because I want to make sure I look at these, and I don't want to answer any of these things here. Let's see, for breakfast, I am just having a bagel. The wife probably won't be up till lunchtime. She was up very late last evening watching things, although I will make her coffee in a little bit. And I'm making myself some tea, as is my preferred drink. And the last thing you want to see is me amped up on caffeine. I start getting squirrely, and my voice goes up yet another octave. Fun thing being me, I actually have to work to keep my voice down. It's actually quite squeaky and annoying to me, myself included. Let me just take out my bagel here, and then if y'all have any questions, oh, you do, good. How difficult was it to adjust to the extreme cold in Maine? How rough are the winters? Which parts of Maine would I avoid? Great question. It's not that hard at all. In truth, it's colder in the Mountain West by quite a bit. The low temperatures usually here don't get much below, let's call it 0 degrees. But what I will tell you, and anyone who lives in the cold can tell you, the wind is really the key thing. If it's just cold, it's not too bad. If it's cold and windy, it's terrible. If you live along the coast, it's not too bad either. Like Maine is considerably warmer than New Hampshire, for example, where I live. But it's not too bad. You do get used to it, and you actually come to like it. I mean, winter's my favorite season because it's honest. It's a time to rest from doing things outside. You don't have to deal with so many people being around. Life slows down, and you can contemplate why you're doing what you're doing, and that's a good thing. You know, it turns out I'm out of cream cheese. Isn't that terrible? See what I mean? All the preparedness in the world and not a bit of cream cheese to have. But that's okay. I can just use bagel with butter. It's probably healthier for me, to be honest. But yeah, I think the winters here are very manageable, to be honest with you, and it's a good place to live. I mean, we have terrible political leadership. Our governor is a complete moron, and unfortunately, there's a lot of. I mean, I don't want to get in trouble for saying this, but there's a lot of people who are kind of go along to get along types who just follow her, where her own recommendations don't make any sense, and we now are dealing with, how should I say, the age of the marionettes, where government comes up with ridiculous regulations and we're supposed to follow them. Like, for instance, you're supposed to wear a mask, but studies show the masks don't work. You're supposed to go ahead and social distance, but you're not social distance far enough to make any difference. So what are we doing? We're being trained. This is Pavlovian conditioning on a national and international scale. And it's disgusting. And so, I don't know, maybe, damn it. It's my belief and observation that things have to get worse before they get better. And if in fact that is right, I suspect what we will see is people have to be shed of their false hopes. So what's going to happen? We are going to limp to this election one way or another. I do suspect Trump will win at this point, and I suspect that because every time another car gets burnt down or another house gets destroyed or another cop gets shot, Trump gets another few thousand votes because another person said, the hell with this, I can't even afford to risk surviving. And it's kind of an interesting thing. The left, I think, is trying to lose the election because they want to win the war. My thought is that they want their people so mad that they will riot and destroy things, and they think they might have critical mass, and I'm not going to say they're wrong. I mean, especially with considering the fact that all the big money's behind them. So we'll see what happens with that. I really don't know. It's a curious thing to watch. But I would say to people, now is a good time to get to the rural areas, to get somewhere quiet, and find a way to not draw attention to yourself, frankly. You know, some people go out there and they tell you, you need to go out there and you need to advocate and you need to be real loud about it. But the reality is, if you are someone who has not necessarily run afoul of things and you can kind of get to a place that's smart and build some friends, now is the time for quiet organization. Now is the calm before a major storm. And I think you need to do it. Someone like me who's been out here a little too long doesn't have that luxury. But I think for the rest of you guys, that would probably be the smarter move. And I will try to keep talking as long as I can about things that are interesting and useful to you. And yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, beyond that, I mean, I do plan on doing some writing this year. I have an idea that's beginning to form, but it's not fully developed yet. But it will be a different sort of book than I've done in the past, but perhaps one that's more timely to get to the sort of spiritual battles at the heart of this and explain to you how your history is not what you think it was. Because my first nonfiction book, someone has to say it was the story of how America was subverted from its own intent. But what I've never told you is the story that kind of covers how America was subverted at the very beginning. And that's a story people don't want to hear because it runs afoul of our national mythology that we had everything right. But I came from the Moldbug school, the neo-reactionary Dark Enlightenment thinking that ultimately said something like this, which was that we made the choice of intellect over wisdom many years ago, and in so doing, we created great wealth and prosperity, but at the cost of spiritual poverty and in a question of lack of self-awareness. And as we look at it in America, that's basically suffering national schizophrenia, we can see the validity of that analysis as we seek new identity that is something that's sustainable, that's healthy, that can work. And that we kind of have to go back to go forward to understand why the concept of an idea state failed, because ultimately, if you believe all that your state has in that identity is an idea, that if you change ideas or disagree over ideas, it will fall apart. And that's what empires do. Empires fall apart because their ideology breaks or their finance breaks. And ultimately, the idea that you're going to quantify value is no different than just one other ideology. It's all it is. And it may be amoral with respect to its manifestations, but it isn't in terms of how it governs human interactions. And that's what ideology, I guess, more properly understood would mean, how people relate to one another. So I've had a little time at least to think about some things and put some ideas together, and hopefully some of this will be interesting and useful to you. And then I can get back to my reading, which I want to do, and I have some other stuff I'm going to have to take care of here as we wander into the end of the year, but try to give you a message and hope for something that's better, because I don't want to just be out there telling you how horrible things are going to be, even though I believe it. I actually want you to have hope and belief that you could be something better. And remember, on the flip side of something bad, something good often comes. And so that's something to be aware of. So if you look for your solutions and the right answers, you might just find the narrow path that will get you through some very hard times. So I'll leave it with that. That's a nice ending, so that way you don't have to have the misery of watching me try to eat food. God bless each and every one of you. I hope you have a great day. I will be back Friday evening for sure. I might do some morning shows too. We'll see. I've been trying to get ahead, and I know we have at least one doctor's appointment this week, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. For me having time, but check out Free Atlantic Radio over on iPod. Actually, this is hilarious. I had more people listening to me the one morning than Joe Biden did. I was ranked 51, and he was ranked 53, which means at least you're getting. I'm just very amused by the weird ways in which we process information, but it makes sense. I tell you more things that other people won't, and rightly or wrongly, I shoot straight with you because I just don't have the time or energy to do otherwise. Call it a virtue, call it expediency. It's the same outcome, right? That we check out Free Atlantic Voices. We might have a new show coming in there in about a week or two that will add a female perspective on some things. So John Q is working on that. We'll see how that comes together. Hopefully he does a good job. I'm sure he will. And we will have more content from me and from the missus in the future. We know you guys like to ask the questions and shoot the things, and I'll try to guide you through as best I can. Last word I give you, I always like to give you a little prayer. Just find your way to the Lord. Heavenly Father, I just pray that everyone listening to this broadcast finds a way to your truth, and understanding that there is only one truth, and that in chasing that, you have to go ahead and get past this idea that you have the answers to all things, and pray that we have the wisdom of Jesus, and that we have the opportunity to learn these things. So, in Jesus' name, and Father's name, rather, I pray that. Amen. I'm looking out for you. I'm doing the best I can. It's a different fight than I expected, to be honest with you. It's quite different. And learning what this new world looks like is very difficult. But understand, what's happening is a global problem. So whether you're up here in the Atlantic, throughout the United States, Canada, or anywhere else in the world, we are all going through this together as one human group. And that we, even though we want different things, and we should want different things and not be forced into one area, I don't believe that for a second, we ultimately have a common enemy, and we need to learn everything we can about this. So I'll try to give you some more intel on that. But I would suggest, if you go back further, it's easier to see. You understand something better when you get to its foundation. So don't be afraid to look backwards before you move forwards, because what's ahead of you is chatter and static, and what's behind you is truth. So good luck in finding that. God bless each of you in your search, and keep seeking. All right? Have a good day.